Good evening, dear listeners, and a very warm welcome to you all. Wherever you are tuning in from tonight, maybe cozied up in bed, listening from your favorite quiet corner at home, or perhaps relaxing somewhere peaceful, with the world fading away outside, I'm so glad you've joined me here. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Maybe pull the covers up a bit higher and feel the day gently slip away. Let the story begin. The Case of the Haunted Umbrella. Sherlock Holmes unravels the mystery at 221 B. Baker Street, London. Fog lay thick upon the city that autumn evening. At 221 B. Baker Street, Holmes sat idle, craving challenge. Then came the knock at the door. Sir Reginald Hargrove found dead at his Mayfair mansion. Locked study, apparent heart failure from terror. His prized haunted umbrella had moved on its own. Scotland Yard saw a tragic accident or supernatural fright, but Holmes saw a link, the faint scratches on the umbrella's ebony handle, not from age, but deliberate tool marks. One link in a chain that would bind a killer. The game is afoot. Chapter 1. The First Link. I set down these events as they occurred in the autumn of 1892, when the fog lay especially thick over London, carrying the sharp bite of coal smoke and the dank breath of the Thames. At 221 B. Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes paced restlessly before the coal fire that crackled and spat in the grate, filling the room with the warm scent of burning coal, mingled with the strong, earthy aroma of his shag tobacco. Our overcoats hung damp near the hearth, their rough wool still heavy with the night's mist, and a faint, carbolic tang drifted from the chemical apparatus on the side table, where Holmes had been experimenting earlier. The 17 steps from the street rang out sharply that evening, as hurried footsteps ascended. Big Ben tolled 8 in the distance, its deep notes muffled by the fog that pressed against the windows like a living thing. Mrs. Hudson announced our visitor, a young woman in deep mourning, her black veil glistening with moisture from the streets outside. She lifted it with trembling fingers to reveal pale cheeks and eyes reddened from recent tears. "I am Miss Amelia Hargrove," she said, her voice low but steady. "Niece to the late Sir Reginald Hargrove. He was found dead this morning in his locked study at the Mayfair mansion. The police call it heart failure. But I believe there is more, something sinister involving a haunted umbrella." Holmes's eyes gleamed with that peculiar light as he gestured towards the basket chair nearest to the fire. The warmth chased the bitter chill from her skirts as she sat. I poured brandy from the tantalus. Its sweet, burning taste lingered on my tongue as she accepted the glass with gloved hands that shook slightly against the smooth crystal. "Tell us every detail, Miss Hargrove," Holmes urged, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. "No observation is too small." She spoke of her uncle, a wealthy collector of oddities, who had recently purchased an antique umbrella at a Whitechapel estate auction. It was said to be cursed, rumored to move of its own accord, a relic tied to the violent death of its previous owner, a merchant murdered decades earlier. The night before, Sir Reginald had retired to his study alone. A terrible scream had echoed through the house. Servants found the door bolted from within, the key still in the lock. Inside, Sir Reginald lay collapsed beside his desk, face frozen in terror. Heart stopped. Strangest of all, the umbrella, normally kept in its mahogany stand, lay across the room on the floor, as though it had walked there itself. The foghorns moaned low from the river as she finished, and the room grew quiet, save for the fire's soft pops and the distant clatter of handsome wheels on wet cobbles below. Holmes drew upon his pipe thoughtfully, the rough cherrywood warm between his fingers. "The locks?" he asked. "Solid brass, bolted from inside," she replied. "No one could have entered or left." We took a hansom at once. The cab rattled over uneven stones, splashing through puddles that mirrored the flickering gas lamps along Baker Street. The journey to Mayfair passed in near silence, broken only by the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves and the occasional cry of a newsboy. Fog thickened around the grand Hargrove mansion, its stone facade half hidden, ivy clinging like rough tweed to the walls. Inside, the air carried heavy coal smoke from the hall fireplaces. The butler, Mr. Jenkins, led us forward on squeaking leather soles across polished marble. Inspector Lestrade awaited in the study, mustache twitching with irritation at Holmes's arrival. The chamber smelled of aged leather armchairs, old books, and a faint metallic edge, fierce sweat perhaps, mixed with the gunpowder residue from a display pistol on the wall. Damp newspaper lay crumpled beside the desk. Sir Reginald's body rested under a sheet. His fingers were rigid, pupils wide in final shock. "Simple heart failure," Lestrade grunted, stamping against the cold flagstones. The old fellow frightened himself to death with ghost stories. Holmes ignored him. He knelt beside the umbrella on its stand, running a finger along the ebony handle. Faint scratches marred the smooth surface, marks too precise for age or accident. He examined the floor nearby. Similar fine lines on the polished wood. "The first link, Watson," he murmured. These scratches were made by a fine tool, a watchmaker's file perhaps, not by time or chance. Such marks indicate deliberate tampering. I recalled the Red-Headed League affair, where fresh earth on a suspect's boots betrayed a hidden tunnel dug beneath a city street. The criminals had forgotten that the ground remembers every step. Dirt became evidence that shattered their alibi. Here, too, the wood and handle had recorded a human hand at work, not a ghost's. Therefore, the umbrella's mysterious movement was no supernatural event but the result of mechanical interference, likely designed to terrify a man known to have a weak heart. "The link forge is strong, Watson. Did you see it form?" Miss Amelia gasped, hand to her mouth as the fire cast long shadows across the walls. Lestrade scoffed, but Holmes continued, testing window latches, cold brass, secure. No forced entry, yet ingenuity remained possible. The hearth's warmth contrasted the chill draft creeping under the door. I tasted the lingering bitterness of earlier coffee as I noted the details. Later, back at 221B, the fire crackled while rain pattered the panes. Holmes paced, violin in hand, plucking a few idle strings. "The scratches connect human agency to the supposed haunting," he said. "One link forged. Others will follow. Dear reader, the link was there. Did you forge it before Holmes revealed it?" Watson missed its full weight at first. Did you? What chain would you begin to build from these observations? Looking back, I should have seen the significance of those faint marks sooner. But Holmes's powers never ceased to astonish me. The first link forged. The chain begins. Chapter 2. Forging connections. The fog clung stubbornly to London the next morning, thick with the acrid bite of coal smoke and the ever-present damp rot rising from the Thames. At 221 B. Baker Street, the fire burned steadily, its warmth pushing back the chill that seeped through the window frames. Mrs. Hudson brought up breakfast. Hot tea steaming in porcelain cups, toast crisp and golden. the faint, sweet scent of marmalade cutting through the lingering tobacco smoke from Holmes's pipe. He stood by the mantel, studying a street map of the city, its paper rough under his long fingers. "We must follow the trail of the umbrella's origin today, Watson," he said, folding the map with a decisive snap. "Links do not forge themselves in idleness. 4 locations await us." Our first hansom cab rattled down Baker Street, wheels grinding over wet cobbles, splashing through shallow puddles that reflected the pale gas lamps still burning in the midday gloom. The horses' hooves clopped rhythmically, mingling with distant Big Ben, striking 10, and the low moans of foghorns from the river. We arrived at the Whitechapel Auction House, a narrow building squeezed between soot-blackened warehouses. Inside, the air was heavy with old leather, dust, and the musty smell of aged paper and bindings. Mr. Grimshaw, the auctioneer, received us in a cramped back office, lit by a single gas jet. His spectacles glinted as he consulted a heavy ledger, pages smooth but yellowed at the edges. "The Hargrove umbrella? Yes. Lot 47 from the Captain Morley estate," he said, voice nasal and precise. "Sold 3 weeks ago. Fetched 20 guineas. Quite a stir. Ghost stories attached, you know." Holmes leaned forward. "Who else bid actively?" Grimshaw ran a finger down the column. "Mr. Elias Thorne was keen, Sir Reginald's partner in the railway venture. Dropped out at 18 guineas. Also a Mr. Farnsworth, but he withdrew early. The name Thorne struck me at once. Holmes noted it silently, then thanked the man, and we departed, the cold air outside sharp against our faces, carrying the faint gunpowder tang from nearby foundries. Our next stop was Thorne's offices in the city, reached by another hansom, whose driver cursed the thickening traffic. The suite overlooked bustling streets where clerks hurried under umbrellas, footsteps echoing on stone. Inside, the rooms smelled of cigar smoke, polished mahogany, and fresh ink. Elias Thorne rose from his desk, a broad-shouldered man with a booming voice and a firm handshake that left my palm warm. "Terrible business about Reginald," he said, offering brandy from a decanter. The liquor burned sweetly down my throat. "We had our disagreements, investments in Indian railways mostly, but nothing worth murder." Holmes's gaze settled on Thorne's boots. Faint, reddish clay clung to the heels, the same hue as the garden soil at Mayfair. "Your whereabouts on the night of the death?" Holmes asked. "At my club in Pall Mall all evening," Thorne replied smoothly. Yet on the desk lay a small jeweler's file, its metal cool and bright. Holmes made no comment, but I saw his eyes narrow. From there we drove to the Hargrove mansion once more. The gardens were sodden, leaves crunching wetly underfoot like damp newspaper. Lady Hargrove received us in the drawing-room, where a coal fire roared, throwing heat against the cold marble floors. Her silk dress rustled as she poured tea, the china clinking softly, steam rising in fragrant curls. "My husband was absurdly superstitious about that umbrella," she said coolly. "He swore it whispered to him at night." Her maid lingered near the door, apron rough against her hands. Holmes questioned her gently. "A gardener, Mr. Blackwood, quarreled with Sir Reginald the week before," she whispered, "over missing tools. But he was away that night, home in Stepney." We found Blackwood in the potting shed behind the house. The air inside was thick with wet earth, fertilizer, and the sharp sting of carbolic from cleaning buckets. Blackwood leaned on a spade, its handle worn smooth by years of use, dirt etched deep under his nails. "We argued," he admitted gruffly, Sir Reginald accused me of pinching pruning shears. I never touched them. I was drinking at the Red Lion pub till closing. Ask the landlord." Holmes's eyes flicked to a coil of fine wire hanging among rough twine and leather gloves on the wall. "Useful material, that wire," he observed. Blackwood shrugged. "For tying plants, nothing more." As the afternoon waned, foghorns sounding mournfully, we made one final call at Miss Amelia's modest lodgings in Bloomsbury. The stairs creaked beneath our boots like old bones. She welcomed us into a small parlor smelling of fresh bread from the bakery below, and the faint bitterness of coffee cooling in cups. "Uncle was about to alter his will," she confessed, voice trembling, "cutting my portion for a charity he favored." On her table lay a telegram, paper slightly damp from the mist, sent by Thorne requesting a meeting about family affairs. Holmes examined it briefly. "Innocent on the surface," he murmured. Back at 221B as evening fell, rain began to tap steadily against the panes. The fire crackled, casting long shadows. Holmes reached for the Persian slipper, filling it with tobacco whose rich aroma filled the room. We sat with brandy, its warmth chasing the day's chill from our bones. "The clay on Thorne's boots matches the garden mud," Holmes said quietly. "The wire in Blackwood's shed could rig a simple mechanism. Thorne's file might have made those handle scratches." I nodded, feeling the worn leather of my chair. "But alibis seem solid so far." Holmes smiled faintly. "They often do, until tested. Dear reader, links are multiplying. Watson missed the clay on the boots at first. Did you? The connection seems invisible still. Can you see it beginning to form?" Holmes saw 3 clear links today. How many did you spot? What chain would you build from these observations? The rain drummed harder, foghorns answering from the river. Links forging. The chain takes shape. Chapter 3. The chain grows. The fog had thickened overnight into a choking yellow veil that hung over London like wet wool, carrying the sharp sting of coal smoke and the low, briny reek of the Thames. At 221 B. Baker Street, the coal fire roared in the grate, throwing welcome heat against the chill that crept through every crack. Mrs. Hudson's porridge steamed on the table, its warm, oaty scent mingling with the faint carbolic from Holmes's latest experiment, and the ever-present tobacco that clung to the curtains. Holmes was already dressed and alert, standing by the window with a cup of hot tea in hand, watching the gas lamps flicker dimly in the murk outside. "We returned to Mayfair this morning, Watson," he announced, setting the cup down with a soft clink. "The study has not yet yielded all its secrets. The first scratches were only the beginning. Stronger links await discovery. The hansom cab we took rattled through the fog-bound streets, wheels grinding over slick cobbles, horse hooves clopping in the steady rhythm, while Big Ben struck 11, its chimes swallowed almost at once by the mist. Rain began to fall in fine, cold needles as we reached the Hargrove mansion. The ivy on the stone walls glistened darkly, and the air outside smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves. Inside, the butler Jenkins admitted us with his usual quiet deference, leather soles squeaking faintly on the marble hall floor. We went straight to the study. Holmes barred the door behind us, recreating the locked condition of that fatal night. The room felt colder than the rest of the house. The fire had not yet been lit, and a faint draught carried the damp newspaper scent from the crumpled sheets still lying beside the desk. The umbrella stood in its mahogany stand like a silent sentinel, ebony handle gleaming dully in the gaslight. Holmes knelt at once, running his fingers along the base of the stand. There, almost invisible unless one knew to look, were 4 small, crescent-shaped grooves pressed into the polished wood, marks of pressure that no ordinary placement would produce. "The link, Watson," Holmes said softly, tracing one groove with a fingertip. "These indentations are too regular, too deep for casual use. They suggest a temporary attachment, a bracket or hook secured by fine screws or wire, then removed." Such impressions speak of deliberate engineering. I thought at once of the speckled band case, where a seemingly innocent bell pull in a bedroom concealed a deadly mechanism, a thin vent through which a swamp adder descended at a signal. Dr. Roylott had counted on the household's trust in familiar fixtures. The bell rope moved not at all, yet its fixed position and the saucer of milk below betrayed the truth. The ground beneath the ventilator had borne faint traces of sawn plaster, just as these grooves here bear the imprint of human cunning rather than ghostly hands. Therefore, the umbrella was not flung by a spirit but propelled by a contrived device, timed perhaps to startle a man already frail of heart. "The link forges strong, Watson." "Did you see it form?" I drew in my breath sharply. The fire, now lit by a footman, crackled into life behind us, its warmth slowly spreading, while the rain tapped insistently at the window panes. Holmes produced his magnifying glass and bent over the umbrella itself. At the very tip of the ferrule, where metal met wood, he found a tiny, almost invisible hook of steel, no larger than a pinhead, bent at a precise angle. "This is the crucial evidence," he murmured. "A fine wire, threaded through the hook and pulled from outside, could have jerked the umbrella across the room with considerable force. The scream, the collapse, terror induced by apparent movement." Inspector Lestrade arrived shortly afterward, stamping his boots on the threshold to shake off the rain, bringing with him the faint smell of gunpowder from the yard's practice range. "Still chasing ghosts, Holmes?" he asked with a wry smile, offering a flask of brandy, whose sharp, sweet burn cut through the chill. Holmes declined politely and led him to the garden door. Outside, the lawn was sodden, mud squelching under our shoes like thick Thames sludge. Holmes pointed to a narrow flower bed beneath the study window. There, half erased by the night's rain but still discernible, lay partial boot prints, deep heels, distinctive tread. He knelt, measuring with a pocket rule, then compared them mentally to the impressions we had seen on Thorne's boots the previous day. "The pattern matches," he said. "Someone stood here, wire in hand, and gave the fatal tug." The cold wind bit at our faces as we returned inside. The hot tea the maid brought tasted bitter and comforting on my tongue. Holmes paced the study slowly, the fire popping behind him. "The scratches on the handle connect to the grooves in the stand. The grooves connect to the hook. The hook connects to the footprints in the garden. Link by link, the chain grows." That evening, back at 221B, the rain drummed steadily on the roof while Holmes sat with his Stradivarius, drawing slow, thoughtful notes from the strings. The room smelled of fresh tobacco and damp wool drying by the hearth. He reflected aloud on the day's progress. "These marks remind me strongly of the Bruce Partington Plans affair," he said. "A set of submarine blueprints vanished from a locked Admiralty office. Everyone assumed theft by an insider, yet overlooked adhesive residue on a neighboring window frame and scuff marks on the roof tiles. Hugo Oberstein had entered from above, chained his deception with false trails and timetables, But the physical traces, blood on a coat, a dropped ticket, bound him in the end. Here, too, overlooked impressions on wood and earth reveal the hand behind the supposed haunting. Dear reader, the connection seems invisible at first glance. Can you see it now? Holmes saw 4 solid links today. How many did you spot? Before he explained, what did this new evidence begin to tell you? The violin fell silent. The fire hissed softly. The chain grows stronger. Logic binds. Chapter 4. Testing the links by midday. The fog had thinned to a pale, drifting haze, but the air remained raw with coal smoke and the damp chill that never quite left London streets in autumn. At 221 B. Baker Street, the fire burned low, its warmth barely reaching the corners where chemical bottles gleamed on the side table. Holmes stood before the mantel, steepled fingers under his chin, reviewing the notes I had made the previous day. "Theory must be tested, Watson," he said. "Weak links will shatter under pressure. The strong ones will hold. We begin at once. Our first hansom carried us back to the Whitechapel auction house. The cab's wheels clattered over uneven cobbles, splashing through puddles that carried the faint reek of horse manure and river mud. Inside the cluttered office, Mr. Grimshaw greeted us with surprise, spectacles slipping down his nose. We questioned the other active bidder listed in the ledger, Mr. Farnsworth, a thin, nervous collector of curios. I attended the sale purely for research, he insisted, voice high and unsteady. I left Whitechapel at 6 that evening and dined at home. Holmes pressed for witnesses. Farnsworth produced a receipt from a cab company, stamped 7:15. Yet when Holmes casually mentioned Sir Reginald's death hour, Farnsworth paled and fumbled his words. I may have passed near Mayfair on an errand, he admitted. The alibi cracked like thin ice. A weak link broken. From there, the cab rattled toward Pall Mall and Thorne's Club, a dignified building of dark stone where gas lamps burned even at noon. The doorman, stiff in his uniform, confirmed Thorne's signature in the evening book, arrival at 7, departure at 11. But a young waiter, wiping glasses behind the bar, recalled something more. Mr. Thorne stepped out for 10 minutes around 9:30, he said quietly. Said he needed air. Returned looking flushed. The timing aligned too neatly with the scream heard at the Hargrove mansion. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Another link tested and bent. We drove next to Blackwood's small cottage in Stepney. The path was muddy, boots sinking into soft earth that smelled of wet clay and rotting leaves. Blackwood met us at the door, spade in hand, face weathered and guarded. "I told you. I was at the Red Lion till closing," he growled. Holmes produced a photograph of the wire coil from the potting shed. "This wire matches the gauge needed for the umbrella's hook. Did you lend it?" Blackwood hesitated, then nodded. "I, to Mr. Thorne, 2 days before, said it was for repairing a picture frame at his office." The gardener's alibi held firm. Publican and 3 regulars swore to his presence. A suspect link dissolved. At the Hargrove mansion, Lady Hargrove received us in the drawing-room once more. The coal fire roared, casting flickering light across silk upholstery and polished tables. She poured tea with steady hands, the china clinking softly, steam carrying the bitter-sweet aroma of Assam. "You suspect my late husband's partner?" she asked, coolly. Holmes laid out the will documents she had provided earlier. "Your inheritance is secure, untouched by any codicil. Motive vanishes." She gave a small, tight smile. "Then I am no longer useful to your chain, Mr. Holmes." Another weak link shattered. Below stairs we questioned Jenkins, the butler, in the servants' hall, where carbolic soap mingled with the smell of boiled cabbage from the kitchen. His hands, rough from years of polishing silver, trembled slightly as he spoke. I heard them argue, Sir Reginald and Mr. Thorne, over accounts, but I never touched tools or wire. His keys gave him access to the house, yet none to the shed or Thorne's file. His link weakened to breaking point. Our final call was a Bloomsbury tea-house where Miss Amelia waited, a modest place smelling of fresh scones and brewed coffee. Hot tea steamed between us, warming chilled fingers. She showed us friends' letters confirming her presence at a literary evening the night of the death. The telegram from Thorne proved ordinary, routine business. "I loved my uncle," she said softly. "I would never harm him." Her innocence stood firm. Back at 221B as dusk fell, rain began again, drumming steadily on the roof. The fire crackled, tobacco smoke curling thick in the air. Holmes paced before the hearth, violin silent in its case. "Farnsworth's half-truth collapsed under scrutiny," he said. "Thorne's brief absence from the club aligns with opportunity. Blackwood supplied the means but lacked motive or presence. Lady Hargrove and the niece lack both means and opportunity. Jenkins is peripheral. Red herrings all, cleared away." I sank into the worn leather armchair, feeling the day's cold still in my bones, despite the brandy's sweet warmth. Then Thorne remains the strongest thread. Holmes nodded slowly. The file, the wire, the clay on his boots, the club timing. The chain begins to tighten. Dear reader, weak links shattered one by one today. Watson missed the waiter's recollection at first. Did you? The connection grows clearer. Can you see which links held and which broke? Holmes tested 6 threads and found only one enduring. How many did you spot as unbreakable? What chain would you build now that the false trails have fallen? The rain hissed against the windows, foghorns answering mournfully from the river. Weak links shattered. The true chain emerges. Chapter 5. The chain tightens. Dawn broke cold and gray over London, the fog still thick enough to swallow the gas lamps along Baker Street. At 221B, the coal fire had burned low during the night, leaving a faint warmth and the lingering smell of tobacco and damp wool. Holmes stood by the window, coat already on, eyes sharp with purpose. "We move quickly today, Watson," he said. "A telegram arrived at first light. Thorne has been seen at his warehouse near the East India Docks. Opportunity narrows. The chain tightens." We hailed a hansom in the half-light. The cab's wheels clattered over wet cobbles, of horse hooves pounding an urgent rhythm, while fog horns moaned low from the river. The journey eastward took us through awakening streets where costermongers shouted wares and the air grew heavier, with the brackish scent of the Thames mingled with coal smoke from passing barges. By the time we reached the docks, the fog had lifted slightly, revealing a maze of warehouses, cranes, and stacked crates, whose rough wood gleamed with morning dew. Thorne's warehouse stood at the end of a narrow wharf, its double doors ajar. We approached on foot, boots crunching gravel, the cold biting through our gloves. Inside, the vast space smelled of tar, old rope, and machine oil. Gas jets hissed overhead, casting long shadows across piles of railway sleepers and crates marked for Bombay. Thorne was there, alone, bending over a workbench. Tools scattered around him. He straightened sharply at the sound of our footsteps. "Mr. Holmes," he said, voice booming but edged with strain, "this is private property. What brings you here so early?" Holmes stepped forward calmly. "The truth, Mr. Thorne. The wire you borrowed from Blackwood. The file on your desk. the clay still clinging to your boots from the Hargrove garden, and 10 minutes unaccounted for at your club, precisely when Sir Reginald screamed. Thorne's face darkened. Coincidence, nothing more. But his hand moved toward a heavy wrench on the bench. In that instant, the game changed. Thorne bolted, shoving a crate that crashed to the floor with a splintering roar, and darted toward a side door opening onto the wharf. Holmes was after him in a flash, coat flapping, while I followed, heart pounding. We burst into the open air. Fog still clung low, muffling sounds, but Thorne's heavy footsteps echoed ahead along the narrow wooden pier. He ran hard, boots thudding on damp planks, dodging barrels and coils of rope. Holmes cut left behind a stack of tea chests, anticipating the turn toward the main dock road. I struggled to keep pace, breath clouding in the cold, the river's dank smell sharp in my lungs. Thorne glanced back once, saw Holmes closing, and veered toward a gangway leading to a moored barge. Holmes anticipated again, leaping a low crate, landing lightly, and intercepting him at the water's edge. Thorne skidded to a halt, boots sliding on wet boards slick with river mud. The Thames lapped darkly below, foghorns sounding mournfully. "Enough," Holmes said, voice steady despite the chase. "The chain is forged. There is no escape now." At that moment, Inspector Lestrade appeared with 2 constables, summoned by Holmes's earlier wire. Their heavy boots thumped along the pier. Handcuffs glinted in the pale light. Thorne sagged, defiance draining from his broad shoulders. Back at Scotland Yard an hour later, the interrogation room was chill and bare, smelling faintly of carbolic and old pipe smoke. A single gas jet burned overhead. Thorne sat at the scarred table, wrists manacled, while Holmes laid out the evidence piece by piece. The crucial link, Holmes said, producing the umbrella from a constable's bundle, was hidden until now. He turned the ebony handle carefully. With a small tool he pressed a concealed catch. Click, and a narrow compartment slid open, revealing a delicate clockwork mechanism. Tiny coiled spring, escapement wheel, and the fine steel hook we had found earlier. A timed release, set to trigger after you left the club. The wire ran from the garden window, through the hook, and pulled the umbrella across the room, enough to terrify a man with a known heart condition. You intended fright, perhaps ruin through a false will change. Death was unintended, but murder nonetheless. Thorne stared at the device, then at the floor. I only wanted him frightened, enough to sell his shares. The debts were crushing me. Holmes leaned forward. "The link, Watson. This mechanism connects every earlier observation, scratches from your file, grooves from the temporary bracket, footprints in garden mud, the wire coil, the 10-minute absence. Such ingenuity recalls the case of the engineer's thumb, where a hydraulic press concealed a criminal workshop. The villains there used hidden mechanisms to silence witnesses, counting on fear and darkness to cover their tracks, yet overlooked bloodstains on a towel, and the sound of machinery at odd hours forged the chain that bound them. Here, too, a hidden spring, meant to deceive, became the fatal evidence when examined closely. Therefore, Thorne's device, designed for deception, now binds him inescapably. The link forges strong, Watson. Did you see it form?" Thorne's head dropped. Lestrade took his statement, voice gruff but satisfied. That evening at 221B the fire crackled warmly, chasing the day's chill from our bones. Holmes sat with brandy in hand, its sweet burn lingering on the tongue. The chase was necessary, he said. Direct confrontation often loosens the tongue, where logic alone hesitates. Dear reader, the chain tightens around our quarry. Watson missed the full significance of the hidden compartment at first. Did you? The connection seems invisible no longer. Can you see it now? Holmes saw the final links snap into place today. How many did you spot before the confession? Before Holmes revealed the mechanism, what did the chase and the evidence begin to tell you? The rain had started again, tapping softly on the panes. The chain tightens. No escape now. Chapter 6. Links to the Past. The fog had finally begun to lift by late morning, leaving London wrapped in a thin, damp veil that carried the lingering smell of coal smoke and river mud. At 221B Baker Street, the fire burned steadily, its crackle a steady counterpoint to the soft patter of rain against the window panes. Holmes sat at the desk, papers spread before him, old ledgers, telegrams, and a sheaf of bank statements obtained that morning through Lestrade's reluctant cooperation. The room smelled of fresh ink, warm tobacco from his pipe, and the faint, sweet burn of brandy left in 2 glasses from the night before. Thorn's past holds the final threads, Watson, Holmes said, tapping a yellowed document. Motive is rarely born in the moment. It is forged over years. We set out first for the city, taking a hansom whose wheels hissed over still-wet cobbles. The journey passed through streets where clerks hurried under dripping awnings, Big Ben tolling noon in muffled strokes. Thorn's former banking house occupied a narrow building of dark stone near Lombard Street. The manager, a stoop-shouldered man named Mr. Hargreaves, received us in a back office, thick with the scent of old ledgers and polished oak. Gas jets hissed overhead. The air felt close and cool, despite the small fire in the grate. Elias Thorn was a junior partner here 15 years ago, Hargreaves explained, voice low as though the walls might overhear. Ambitious, clever with figures, but careless with other people's money. He slid a faded ledger across the desk, pages smooth but edges frayed. Entries in red ink showed irregular transfers, small at first, then larger, siphoned from client railway investment accounts. Sir Reginald discovered discrepancies in 1887, confronted Thorn privately. Thorn repaid most, promised reform. The matter was hushed to avoid scandal, but the debt never truly vanished. Holmes traced a finger down a column. And the recent pressure? Hargreaves sighed. Indian Railway shares collapsed last spring. Thorn's personal holdings were overextended. He needed quick capital. Sir Reginald held the controlling block and refused to sell. From there, we drove to a quiet solicitor's office in Lincoln's Inn Fields. The clerk's room smelled of wax polish and damp paper. Footsteps echoed on bare boards as an elderly solicitor produced a private memorandum. Thorn approached Sir Reginald 6 weeks ago, the man read aloud, adjusting his pince-nez. Offered to buy shares at inflated price. Refused. Then came veiled threats, hints of old irregularities being made public. Sir Reginald instructed me to prepare a new will, cutting Thorn from any future dealings and redirecting funds to charity. The pieces aligned with chilling clarity. Back at the yard that afternoon, Lestrade allowed us a second interview with Thorn in the same chill room, where the single gas jet flickered and the air tasted faintly of carbolic. Thorn sat slumped, manacles clinking softly. You needed the shares, Holmes said quietly. Sir Reginald would not yield. Exposure of the old embezzlement would ruin you, so you chose another path. Frighten him into compliance. The umbrella, already whispered to be haunted, was perfect. Rig it to move. Induced terror in a man with a weak heart. If he died, the shares might pass more easily through probate, or at least force a quick sale to settle debts. Thorne's voice was hoarse. I never meant death, just panic. Enough to make him sell. The mechanism was simple. A clockwork delay, wire pull from the garden. I borrowed the wire, used my own file. I thought the ghost story would cover everything. Holmes nodded once. Every link now connects. Oh, scratches from your file. Grooves from the bracket you attached. Footprints in garden mud matching your boots. The 10-minute absence from the club to set the timer. The hidden compartment in the handle containing your device. And motive. 15 years of buried debt erupting under new financial strain. All the scattered observations, Whitechapel auction, Thorne's office, the potting shed, the club, the garden, now formed one unbroken chain, each link forged by evidence rather than chance. That evening, at 2:21 the rain had eased to a gentle drizzle. Holmes sat before the fire, violin resting across his knees, plucking idle notes that hummed through the warm, tobacco-scented air. The coal popped softly. Brandy glasses gleamed on the table. This case recalls the Norwood builder very strongly, Holmes reflected. Jonas Oldacre staged his own disappearance. Fake blood, charred remains, a false fire in an empty house. To escape creditors and frame an innocent man. He chained deception through physical props. Sawdust on boots. A blood-stained thumbprint on a wall, a carefully timed blaze. Yet overlooked details. The sawdust trail leading to a hiding place. The smell of fresh paint masking decay. Unraveled the illusion. Holmes saw through the spectacle to the motive. Debt and revenge. Here, too, spectacle, the moving umbrella, the ghost tale, was meant to obscure a mundane crime. Financial desperation driving murder by terror. The past and present are bound in one unbroken chain. I leaned back in the armchair, feeling the worn leather warm against my shoulders. Then it was never supernatural at all, just human greed wearing a supernatural mask. Precisely, Holmes said, and observation strips away the mask. Dear reader, past and present have merged into one chain. Watson missed how deeply the old embezzlement ran at first. Did you? The link was there in the ledgers and the memorandum. Did you forge it before Holmes laid it bare? What chain would you build now that the motive stands revealed? The violin fell silent. The fire hissed. Outside, the last foghorns answered from the river. Past and present. One unbroken chain. Chapter 7. The complete chain. The fog had returned in force by the following afternoon, wrapping Mayfair in a gray shroud that carried the sharp tang of coal smoke and the ever-present damp of the Thames. At the Hargrove mansion, the gas lamps burned early, their soft hiss mingling with the crackle of the drawing-room fire. Holmes had requested the gathering of all principal figures, Lady Hargrove, Miss Amelia, Mr. Blackwood the gardener, Jenkins the butler, and, under police escort, Elias Thorne himself. Lestrade stood near the door, arms folded, mustache twitching with anticipation. The room smelled of polished oak, fresh flowers, and the faint, sweet burn of brandy poured into crystal glasses. The fire threw warm light across the faces assembled in a loose semicircle. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the tall windows. Holmes stood before the hearth, coat discarded, sleeves rolled, his posture calm but commanding. "Gentlemen and ladies," he began, voice clear and measured. "The time has come to lay every link bare. No supposition remains. Only evidence, and the unbreakable chain it forges. He turned first to the physical evidence, lifting the umbrella from its stand and holding it aloft so all could see. Link 1. The scratches on the ebony handle, made by a fine jeweler's file, identical in pattern to the one found on Mr. Thorne's desk in the city. Link 2. 4 crescent grooves in the mahogany stand, pressed by a temporary bracket screwed in place to hold a clockwork device. Link 3. The tiny steel hook at the ferrule tip, bent to catch a fine wire. Link 4. The concealed compartment in the handle itself, revealed by a hidden catch, containing a miniature spring mechanism and escapement wheel, set to release after a timed delay. These are not accidents of age or ghosts. They are the work of a skilled hand seeking to simulate supernatural movement. Thorne shifted in his chair, manacles clinking softly, but said nothing. Link 5. The timeline, Holmes continued. Mr. Thorne signed into his Pall Mall Club at 7 o'clock. He departed briefly at 9:30. 10 minutes unaccounted for, confirmed by the waiter. Sir Reginald's scream was heard at approximately 9:40. Sufficient time to reach Mayfair by cab, enter the garden, attach the wire to the hook, set the timer, and return. The club book and witness place him back by 10. A narrow window, but possible. Lady Hargrove drew in a sharp breath. Miss Amelia clutched her handkerchief. Link 6. The witnesses. The maid saw a shadow move briefly in the garden that night, too fleeting to identify, but consistent with a man crouching beneath the study window. Mr. Blackwood supplied the wire, innocently, for what he believed was a picture frame repair, but its gauge matches exactly the pull line needed. Jenkins heard nothing unusual, for the mechanism was silent until release. Blackwood nodded grimly. Jenkins looked pale in the firelight. Link 7. Motive. 15 years ago, Mr. Thorne embezzled from client funds at his former banking house, sums quietly repaid after Sir Reginald's private confrontation. The debt never truly died. Last spring's railway collapse left Thorne desperate. Sir Reginald held the controlling shares and refused to sell. A new will threatened to cut Thorne out entirely and expose old irregularities, frighten the man into selling, or, if the heart failed, let probate and grief hasten the transfer. The haunted umbrella, already a part of family lore, became the perfect weapon, terror without visible hand. Thorne's head bowed. "I never intended murder," he whispered. "Only pressure." Holmes stepped closer. The final connecting link, opportunity and execution. You attended the Whitechapel auction, knew the umbrella's reputation, purchased the file, borrowed the wire, matched the garden mud to your boots. Every step deliberate. Every observation now binds you. He turned to the room at large. Physical evidence links to timeline links. Witness links to motive links. Motive links to the final device. Every link accounted for. The chain complete. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the fire's soft pops and the rain outside. Lestrade moved forward, nodding to his constables. Thorne rose without resistance, face ashen in the gaslight. Dear reader, every link has now been forged and tested. Holmes saw the entire chain from the first scratch. How many did you assemble before this final gathering? Before he spoke, what did the scattered evidence already tell you? Watson stood in quiet awe. Did you deduce the full binding before the explanation? Chapter 8. Justice in Chains. The police carriage departed the Hargrove mansion under a sky already darkening into evening, wheels grinding slowly over the wet cobbles of Mayfair, while the last traces of daylight bled into fog. Inside Scotland Yard, the corridors echoed with the heavy tread of constables and the distant clank of iron doors. The air carried the sharp, clean sting of carbolic soap mingled with the musty smell of old files and the faint, metallic tang of ink from freshly written reports. Gas lamps burned low along the stone walls, casting long, wavering shadows that danced across the flagstones worn smooth by countless footsteps. Elias Thorne was led down a narrow passage to a holding cell, wrists still secured by cold steel manacles that clinked softly with each step. The cell door opened with a heavy groan. Inside, the small space smelled of damp stone and old straw matting on the floor. When the door clanged shut behind him, Thorne turned, pressing his forehead briefly against the bars. His broad face, usually ruddy with confidence, had drained to a sickly gray in the dim light. "I thought the ghost would shield me," he said hoarsely to the young constable stationed outside. "Everyone fears what they cannot see. I never imagined someone would look past the fear, past the umbrella itself." His voice cracked, anger giving way first to bitterness, then to something quieter, closer to genuine remorse. He sank onto the narrow wooden bench, elbows on knees, head bowed into his hands. The sweet warmth of brandy he had once savored at his club now felt impossibly distant. The cold of the cell seeped through his coat like the Thames mist outside. At 221 B. Baker Street, that same evening, the coal fire roared high in the grate, throwing welcome heat into every corner of the sitting room. The familiar sense of shag tobacco, warm leather from our armchairs, and the faint, sweet burn of brandy from the tantalus filled the air. Rain pattered steadily against the window panes while foghorns answered mournfully from the river far below. Holmes sat in his usual chair, legs stretched toward the hearth, pipe drawing slowly between his lips. I occupied the opposite seat, still feeling the day's tension in my shoulders, despite the comforting glow of the fire. A telegram from Lestrade had arrived an hour earlier. Thorne's confession complete and signed, the clockwork mechanism surrendered as Crown evidence, charges formally entered, manslaughter by terror, attempted fraud, conspiracy to pervert justice. The yard would proceed swiftly. "Loose ends tie themselves with satisfying neatness," Holmes remarked, exhaling a thin stream of smoke that curled lazily toward the ceiling. Mr. Farnsworth's nervous stammer at the auction house was mere anxiety over being questioned, no deeper guilt. Blackwood supplied the wire in good faith, believing it for an innocent repair. His alibi at the Red Lion never wavered. Lady Hargrove's cool reserve masked only the quiet grief of a long marriage ending badly, not complicity. Miss Amelia's sorrow was genuine, her literary evening alibi confirmed by half a dozen witnesses. Jenkins, faithful servant to the last, heard arguments but touched no tool or wire. Every red herring dissolved under scrutiny. I nodded slowly, swirling the brandy in my glass. Its sweet warmth lingered on the tongue. "And Scotland Yard? Lestrade claims the public credit, naturally," Holmes said with the faintest of smiles. "Headlines tomorrow will speak of Yard's swift action in Mayfair mystery." But he sent a private wire. "A chain of evidence too strong to break. My thanks. High praise from a man who once called my methods theatrical." Mrs. Hudson appeared at the door with a tray, hot tea steaming in porcelain cups, fresh scones still warm from the oven, their buttery aroma cutting pleasantly through the tobacco haze. She set it down with a quiet, "There now, gentlemen," and withdrew, leaving the soft clink of china and the fire's gentle crackle to fill the silence. Lady Hargrove would lay her husband to rest in the family vault at Highgate Cemetery within the week, quietly, without scandal. Miss Amelia, now sole heiress, had already instructed the family solicitor to sell the infamous umbrella at private auction. Proceeds would go to the charity Sir Reginald had favored in his final days. Blackwood retained his position in the garden, relieved and grateful. Jenkins continued his duties below stairs, polishing silver with the same steady hands. London's great wheel of justice turned onward, steady and inexorable. I raised my glass toward the firelight, to the power of observation and the chains it forges. Holmes touched his glass lightly to mine, and to the truth that binds when every link is accounted for. The criminal bound, justice served. Dear reader, the chain has closed irrevocably around its quarry. Watson watched in quiet admiration as the final pieces locked into place. Did you foresee how every loose thread would untangle so cleanly? The connection stands revealed in full now. Can you see how each earlier observation, scratches, footprints, wire, absence, led inevitably to this quiet evening by the fire? Outside, the rain continued its soft drumming on the roof. The city settled into night, fog curling once more through the gaslit streets. Inside 221B, the fire burned on, warm and steady. Chapter 9. Links restored. 3 weeks after Thorne's committal, the fog had returned to London in earnest, a thick gray blanket that muffled every sound and carried the sharp bite of coal smoke through every street and alley. At the Old Bailey, the great hall echoed with the low murmur of spectators and the steady tread of ushers across worn flagstones. Gas lamps burned steadily along the walls, their light reflecting off polished wood paneling and the brass railings of the public gallery. The air inside smelled of old varnish, damp wool from overcoats, and the faint metallic tang of ink from clerks' ledgers. The proceedings were mercifully brief. Elias Thorne stood in the dock, shoulders squared but eyes downcast, as the Crown Prosecutor laid out the chain of evidence once more. Scratches, grooves, wire, footprints, hidden mechanism, 15-year embezzlement, desperate motive. The jury, after less than 2 hours' deliberation, returned a verdict of guilty on manslaughter by terror and attempted fraud. The judge, voice grave beneath his scarlet robes, pronounced sentence 12 years penal servitude. Thorne gave no outburst. He merely nodded once, manacles clinking softly as he was led below. Outside the court, rain began to fall in steady sheets, drumming on the stone steps and splashing against hansom cabs waiting in rank. I stood beneath an umbrella with Holmes, watching the crowds disperse. Justice, in its slow but certain way, has closed the chain. Holmes remarked quietly. Every link tested, every weak one broken, every strong one holding firm. Back in Mayfair, later that afternoon, the Hargrove mansion felt lighter, as though the weight of suspicion had lifted with the verdict. Lady Hargrove received us in the drawing-room, where a fresh coal fire crackled warmly, chasing the chill from the marble floors. She wore black silk trimmed with jet, but her posture was straighter, her voice steadier. "The estate is settled," she said, pouring tea from a silver pot whose steam carried the bitter-sweet aroma of Darjeeling. "Sir Reginald's final codicil stands. The charities receive their portion. The umbrella has been sold privately, proceeds to the London Hospital for Sick Children. No ghost will trouble this house again." Miss Amelia sat beside her aunt, cheeks flushed with quiet relief. "I am to marry in the spring," she confided softly, their fingers tracing the rim of her cup. A young solicitor from Lincoln's Inn, kind, steady. Uncle would have approved. She smiled for the first time since we had met her, a small but genuine light in her eyes. The will leaves me the house and sufficient income. I intend to keep the garden as it is. Blackwood will stay on as head gardener. He has earned his peace. We visited the potting shed briefly before leaving. Blackwood was there, sleeves rolled, hands deep in rich earth as he bedded winter bulbs. The air smelled of wet soil, fertilizer, and the sharp tang of carbolic from his cleaning rags. "No more whispers of theft or curses," he said gruffly, wiping his brow. "The master's gone, but the roses will bloom come spring. That's enough for me." Jenkins met us at the front door, his leather shoes polished to a mirror shine, or posture as upright as ever. "The household resumes its rhythm, gentlemen," he said with quiet dignity. "Sir Reginald would wish it so." As our hansom carried us back toward Baker Street, the rain eased to a fine mist. London began to reclaim its ordinary pulse. Newsboys shouting evening editions, costermongers calling wares beneath dripping awnings, hansoms splashing through puddles that reflected flickering gas lamps. The foghorns on the Thames sounded distant now, less mournful, more a part of the city's steady breathing. Clerks hurried home under umbrellas, their footsteps echoing on wet pavements. Shop windows glowed warmly against the dusk, displaying gloves, books, and gleaming brass fittings. At 221B that evening, the fire burned high, its crackle mingling with the soft hiss of rain on the roof. Mrs. Hudson brought up hot coffee, bitter and strong, cutting through the lingering tobacco smoke, and fresh gingerbread, whose spicy sweetness filled the room. Holmes sat with his violin across his knees, plucking idle notes that hummed through the warm air. I settled into my armchair, feeling the worn leather warm against my back. "The chain is restored to order," Holmes said at length. "Innocence cleared, guilt bound, futures set upon their proper paths. London forgets its brief hauntings quickly. By next week, the umbrella will be a forgotten curiosity. By next month, Sir Reginald's name will appear only in probate notices. The city moves on." I nodded, tasting the coffee's sharp edge on my tongue, and yet the method endures. Observation restores what deception tried to shatter. "Precisely," Holmes replied. "Every link accounted for, not merely in court, but in life. The innocent walk free, the guilty bear their sentence, the streets resume their rhythm. Order, once disrupted, returns. Dear reader, the links have been restored." Watson watched as innocence emerged from shadow and futures brightened once more. Did you foresee how cleanly the innocence would be cleared? The connection stands whole now, every loose thread tied, every suspicion dissolved. Can you see how the chain, once forged, not only binds the guilty but frees the blameless? Outside, the rain had stopped. A single star showed faintly through the thinning clouds. Inside, the fire burned on, steady and bright. London's streets lay quiet once more. Order restored to London's streets. Chapter 10. By the Fire at Baker Street. 2 evenings after Thorne's committal to trial, the fog had lifted entirely from London, leaving the night air crisp and unusually clear. At 221 B Baker Street, the coal fire burned with a steady, cheerful glow, its warmth spreading through the familiar sitting room and chasing away every lingering chill of the case. The scent of fresh tobacco drifted from Holmes's pipe, mingling pleasantly with the sweet aroma of Mrs. Hudson's hot toddy, lemon, honey, and a generous measure of brandy, served in 2 steaming glasses on the low table between us. Our armchairs faced the hearth. The worn leather creaked softly as I settled deeper. Legs stretched toward the flames. The evening papers lay folded on the side table. The Times had given the affair a restrained headline: Mayfair, mystery solved. Businessman charged in death of collector. The Telegraph was less circumspect, praising the Yard's brilliant cooperation with private consultation. Holmes had skimmed both, then tossed them aside with a faint smile. "Another chain forged and tested," he remarked, drawing slowly on his pipe. "Sir Reginald Hargrove rests in Highgate. Miss Amelia inherits a fortune cleansed of curses. Lady Hargrove returns to quiet widowhood. Thorne awaits judgment at the Old Bailey. The mechanism, spring, hook, wire, lies in an evidence locker, mute witness to human ingenuity turned to harm." I sipped the toddy. Its warmth spread pleasantly down my throat, carrying the sharp bite of lemon and the comforting sweetness of honey. A remarkable case, Holmes. From a single scratch on an ebony handle to a complete chain binding a murderer. Your method never fails to astonish me. Holmes steepled his fingers beneath his chin, eyes reflecting the firelight, with that peculiar gleam I had come to know so well. The chain method, Watson, is nothing more nor less than the disciplined application of observation. Each clue is a link, raw, isolated, meaningless alone. The scratches on the umbrella handle were meaningless until connected to the jeweler's file. The file meant nothing until matched to Thorne's desk. The desk meant nothing until tied to his absence from the club. Absence meant nothing until aligned with the garden footprints. Footprints meant nothing until linked to motive buried 15 years deep. Observation alone gathers the links. Logic alone forges them into an unbreakable whole. He paused, gazing into the flames as though seeing the entire sequence replayed there. Consider the science beneath it. The human mind is prone to deception, by others, by itself. A ghost story exploits fear, the oldest and strongest emotion. It clouds reason, narrows vision. Yet every deception leaves traces. A tool mark too precise for chance. A boot print too fresh for coincidence. A wire coil too perfectly gauged for mere gardening. These are not accidents, they are data. When you have eliminated the impossible, supernatural movement in a locked room, what remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Human hands, human greed, human timing. He leaned forward slightly, voice lowering as though addressing not just me, but every reader who might one day ponder these pages. I recall the Hound of the Baskervilles with particular vividness. There, too, a spectral terror was staged to frighten a man to death or flight. A phosphorescent hound, trained and painted, loose on the moor under cover of fog and legend. The criminal counted on superstition to blind observation. Yet the chain formed. Paw prints too large yet too regular. The smell of phosphorus on a scrap of cloth. The absence of real howls on certain nights. The timetable of Sir Henry's movements matching the beast's appearances. Link by link, the illusion shattered. The hound was no demon but a starved, painted animal. The death no curse but calculated murder by cardiac terror. In both cases, the method was identical. Create fear through spectacle. Obscure the mundane crime beneath. In both, the chain of physical evidence, marks, smells, timings, proved stronger than any ghost tale. Observation defeats deception because the material world cannot lie. It can only be misread. until someone reads it correctly. Holmes settled back, pipe glowing faintly in the firelight. That is why the chain endures. It demands no belief, only attention. Every link must be tested. Weak ones break, strong ones hold. When every link is accounted for, when motive, means, and opportunity bind together without gap or contradiction, the truth stands revealed, not as theory, but as fact. The science of deduction is at root the science of refusing to be deceived. I smiled, feeling the deep comfort of the room, the fire's steady crackle, the quiet companionship of years. You make it sound almost inevitable, Holmes. It is inevitable, he replied softly, when one trains oneself to see. The untrained eye sees a haunted umbrella. The trained eye sees scratches, a hidden spring, a 10-minute absence, a 15-year debt. The difference is not genius, it is habit. Forge the habit of observation, dear reader, and no chain of deception can withstand you. The fire popped once, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, a hansom cab clattered past in the street below, its wheels hissing on damp stone. Big Ben struck the hour 11, its deep notes carrying clearly through the clear night air. Holmes raised his glass in a small salute. Until the next chain forges, dear listener, the game continues. I touched my glass to his. The toddy was warm, the fire brighter, the room at peace. Another case closed, another link in the long record of Sherlock Holmes's methods